The Aetherdrift Precons are here, and we are giving you the full breakdown, so stay tuned.
I'm Mia, and my elbows extend too far.
I'm BZ. My wingspan is taller than I am. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you're sick of hearing weird things about us, you can just forget that. Go to Card Kingdom, buy all the magic cards you want, and they all arrive in one package. And even if you spend $50 or more on all this awesome Aetherdrift stuff we got coming out, you get free shipping.
You can buy sealed product, you can buy singles, you can buy everything that you could ever want so long as it's magic related on cardkingdom.com. So if you use our link, that tells them you sent us, and we would really appreciate that. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you could save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order, which you can buy anything in the world for. But you can use that discount on custom sleeves or cool matte sleeves.
We have some cool custom ones that we are happy to get from Dragon Shield. The quality really holds up over time, too. We are sponsored by Moxfield. Not yet, later. You'll see. And we have Patreon. If you want to support us, like our fine patrons, including Blitzflix and Relictus, you can do that over at the site. It can get your deck featured on this show. Not this one, a future one. So we're here with our complete Precon breakdown. We're going to tell you everything we need to know. We actually got to play test these quite a few times against each other, and we are going to be covering the Face Commander, the best reprints, the best new cards, some budget editions, some non-budget editions, some cuts, because all these Precons, there's always a few cards we want to just get out of there right away, and some pros and cons to sort of tie the whole thing together and give you some practical advice when you pick up the decks and play them.
I had so much fun testing these. They have themes that I would not have expected from this vehicle-based set. The first one that we're going to be talking about is Living Energy at $50. The commander is Saheeli, Radiant Creator. 1 red, blue, green for a 4/4. Whenever you cast an Artificer or Artifact spell, you get an energy. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you could pay 3 energy. If you do, create a token that's a copy of target permanent you control, except it's a 5/5 artifact creature in addition to its other types, and it has haste. You sack it at the beginning of the next end step. This is a very cool commander, but it does remind me of Satya, the energy commander for Modern Horizons 3.
We're getting a lot of energy. I really never would have expected, you know, before these were announced, that the Teamer energy was going to be from Aetherdrift, especially when energy is not in the main set at all. But I guess they wanted to explore some more design space. At least it's not Jeskai. You know, there's definitely new stuff going on with green instead of white as the third color. So there's definitely some things to figure out. Saheeli is interesting. This card kind of slaps in terms of, like, when you play Saheeli, you're probably the problem. This is going to be doing some really punchy things. In the late game, you can get some ridiculous wonky ETBs. It does say sacrifice the thing, so if there's a dies trigger, you get all of the bonuses from that. We had a game where I played a triplicate Titan, and it's like, okay, cool, make a copy, hit you for 5, it dies, get 3 3/3s.
I thought this was a very explosive commander, but it also felt very feast or famine. I soared to this commander very, very early, and because of that, he basically couldn't win after a certain point if he wasn't ramping enough to keep up with Saheeli's just high mana cost and some of the other higher mana costs in the deck.
Yeah, the deck also kind of has this artifact theme where there's some cards that just care about artifacts or the mana value of artifacts, or, you know, Sai Master Thopters is in here. When you cast an artifact, you get a Thopter. That's cool. And some of that doesn't necessarily always line up with energy, but it still felt like a functional deck. I wasn't having problems where, you know, I would never make an energy all game or I would never play an artifact. They definitely overlapped in a meaningful way. And we got to get to the reprints because this is obviously being recorded before the Precons are out. So we have the actual prices of these cards before they're impacted by the reprints. The first one being Lightning Greaves at $7.50, solid little protection spell. And this is the worst reprint. You know, this is the 5th best reprint. Maybe that's what I should say.
There's also Retrofitter Foundry at $9 in here. These reprints are pretty good. I'm very excited. There's also Triplicate Titan at $9.50, both very functional in the deck and also a good reprint monetary-wise.
I was surprised that Triplicate Titan got up to $9.50. I don't know when that happened.
I saw it because it was in my Jalira deck for the longest time when I had that still put together, and that was one of the cards that made my deck not budget at a certain point because it got so high.
Yeah, the deck was like a $20 deck or something, and then one day it was like $40, and you're like, what?
Yeah, because of that man.
Yeah, there's also Conjurer's Closet at $13. Now, I will say, this card doesn't really make a ton of sense in the deck, and there's a few ETBs and stuff, but I ultimately think you can just cut this one and sell it or trade it, and you really wouldn't lose any synergy. But it is a $13 card, so we'll take it in the deck. And lastly, Academy Ruins is in here too. That's a $21 card. It's a nice land, puts your artifacts back if they get killed, so it's great recursion for the deck, or it's just a great piece of some value.
Overall, these are $60 worth of reprints in the top 5, and that is pretty good considering that is more value in reprints than you are paying for the deck itself, which is at $50.
Next, we're going to move to the best new cards. Each deck has, I think, 10 brand new cards, and they're all pretty sweet. This first one I did get to play with, and it was kind of good. Adaptive Omni Tool, 2-mana artifact. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And whenever the equipped creature attacks, you look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can reveal an artifact from among those, put it in your hand, then put the rest on the bottom in random order, and it equips for 3. It's a little slow, but the deck did make enough artifacts where I equipped this onto a trampler, and it actually was relevant for damage.
This was surprisingly powerful. It has like a nettle cyst or cranial plating type of effect, and because it doesn't say non-token artifact, this can spiral into a lot of stats very quickly, especially if you have evasion.
Or you just throw it on a Thopter, and it's like, even if you kill my Thopter, I'm not really that upset. Plus, it basically draws a card when it attacks. The next one is Stride Hanger Automaton. Kind of a weird one in this deck. You might want to trim it, but it is pretty good overall in like a general commander sense. It's a 3-mana artifact. It's a 1/4. Thopters you control get +1/+1, and whenever you make an artifact token, one or more, those tokens plus an additional 1/1 Thopter are created instead. So if you make a clue, a food, treasure, a blood, name another one.
You named so many. Those are the most.
A shard.
Yeah.
You get a thing. Actually, a shard is an artifact.
I was like, a shard is an enchantment.
I'm sorry.
Stride Hanger Automaton is a cool card. I'm very excited to be seeing it next to Assembly Manufactor and all of those because we love making extra tokens when we can. This deck actually had a few ways to make Thopters outside of this too, like with Psy and Whirler Rogue, so that stat boost might be relevant in terms of just like poking in damage, especially if you can copy like Whirler Rogue and make multiple types of like Thopters overall.
Yeah, it's kind of cool with Saheeli because Saheeli can make another Stride Hanger Automaton, and then that gives you a Thopter, and then if you make another thing, you get a Thopter and a Thopter, so it's kind of cool, and the buffs can start stacking up, so keep an eye on it, but it's not going to be your best card, but it is a pretty sweet one. Next up, we have, what is it?
The next card is Nissa, World Soul Speaker. 3 and a green for a 3/3 and landfall, get 2 energy. You can pay 8 energy rather than pay the mana cost for permanent spells you cast. This is super cool, especially if you can just chain together extra landfall triggers, but I feel like it's one of those cards that doesn't fit perfectly with this deck, but I'm also trying to think where else would it fit.
Yeah, I think it's kind of okay. You can maybe start adding in fetch lands and stuff and taking that to super duper ramp up your energy production, and there's also like a Triplicate Titan. That's pretty cool to cast for free. I'll definitely pay 8 energy. There were games where I got a bunch of energy. I had like 40. And in that case, you can definitely sort of like go off with Nissa. I want to say something random about it. There have been a lot of Nissas, and it feels like we're just jumbling the last couple words of Nissas. It's like, oh, the World Waker, the Animist, the Vastwood Seer, the soul of the voice of Zendikar, the world soul speaker. We are running out of things to call Nissa.
I completely agree. With Nissa, I feel like if you gave me the name of one and put the abilities of another underneath, I would just go, yeah, you know, that makes sense.
That's the right one. Time to add cards to this deck. How about some budget adds? We're going to start out with Gonti's Aetherheart. Now, I will say one thing about energy cards in general is I don't think there's a single card that makes energy that is above like $4. They're all really cheap, so it's totally realistic to throw $30 into this deck and make it almost the best energy shell you could have.
I mean, with energy, it's so niche. You're not just throwing an energy in a random deck and going, yeah, you know what, that really synergizes with my deck. I feel like if you had the precon from Fallout or the precon from MH3 and you kind of shoved all of the parts that kind of made sense together, you would have a pretty functional deck.
Yes, but I did just say Gonti's Aetherheart 30 seconds ago and then proceeded to not talk about it. It's a 6-mana artifact that gives you an extra turn if you pay enough energy, and that I think is going to be super solid. You can also make copies with Saheeli, but they're legendary, so it's not as good. But if you have nothing better to do, I guess you can. There's just not a ton of like, oh my god, I got you. Basically, it's like 6 mana, make 12 energy, take an extra turn.
I mean, I'm not mad at that. This deck just churns on energy, and you need a big reservoir of it to be poking in damage or making copies or getting just a ton of effects. Plus, taking an extra turn is not a bad way to use it.
Yeah, and we have like, is it Generatorium? That's the one that says whenever you make energy, you get an extra energy instead. Okay, Saheeli especially is a source of like repeated small energy. You play a Signet, you play an Artificer. Now you're getting 2 and 2 instead of 1 and 1, so it really adds up.
Esika's Chariot is also a great way to be utilizing tokens. You can make tokens, and then Saheeli copies the tokens, and then you have a big board full of tokens.
It's so cool in this deck is when you cast it, you get the trigger to make an energy, and then let's just use Triplicate Titan because that's the guy that's always on my mind right now with this deck. You play a Triplicate Titan, you crew the Esika's Chariot, you use Saheeli to make a 5/5 copy of it, then when you attack with the 5/5 copy and the Esika's Chariot, you make another 5/5 Triplicate Titan that stays around, sure, the original one is going to die. You actually want that to happen. But then you get to keep the Isika's Chariot one, and it just sort of snowballs from there. I think that's a really tough start to get out from under.
I mean, I love just chaining big things into bigger things that people just cannot help but need to remove, and this is a very cool way to do it.
Yeah, there's also Molten Gatekeeper, just an artifact that's going to ping as you're making these tokens, as you're making these Thopters. It's also a reasonable thing to double up on for a turn or so when you get Saheeli going.
Now that Amber's here, we could talk about Threefold Thunderhulk again. Threefold Thunderhulk is going to be 8 power because of Saheeli's 5/5-ness and because it comes with 3/1/1 counters on it. So when you attack with it because it has haste, it's going to make 8 1/1 gnomes, and that is awesome.
This card is ridiculous with a lot of different commanders. I definitely have it on my radar. It's like an up-and-comer. I think it's way better than Mirror Battlesphere in a lot of decks. In this instance, like you said, you play it, it enters with 3. You get 3, gnomes? You get 3 gnomes. Then you Saheeli it, you get 8. It attacks, you get 8 more gnomes, and you hit somebody for 8, or you force a chump block. You just got 16 gnomes for nothing. Or wait, I guess it's actually 19 gnomes for nothing. This card is kind of cool. It's pretty sweet, and it's a lot of dudes, especially if you've got things like the Decoction module in this deck that says whenever a creature enters, you get an energy.
See, it's really awesome, too, because these gnomes are also artifacts. So if you have things that play into that, like that one equipment that said that it gets +1/+1 for each artifact you have, that's an extra 19 power right there just because of all of these gnomes on the field.
Now we're going to look at some non-budget ads. $5 or more is usually our threshold for these. If you're looking to bling this deck out or get some more, punchies, get some more punchies. If you're looking to get some more punchies for this deck, you can try Urza, Lord High Artificer. This is the guy that makes a Construct, and then all of your artifacts tap for mana. So now when you do all this nonsense, you're also making mana, and it helps you generate more advantage faster, and Saheeli's just going to get so out of control with this.
You're going to be creating a giant Construct, and then you're going to be able to get those free cards off the top a ton of times because all of your stuff is going to make artifacts for the most part, or you're just going to chain together so much stuff that it doesn't even matter because you'll be getting so much more advantage.
Plus, he's an artificer, so he does give you an energy. Next up, Thunderhawk Gunship. This is a sweet one. It's a vehicle that makes 2 Astartes Warriors, but when it attacks, your creatures gain flying, and if you Saheeli copy it, the vehicle is already crewed because it's a 5/5 version of the card, and that's going to give all of your dudes flying, plus 2 extra guys. It's a big swing.
I love a good random card from 40k, and this is another one that just really feels at home in here, even though it is from a completely different set. Next one is Portal to Phyrexia. This is brutal in every deck, but especially since it's an artifact, it goes well here. Each opponent's going to sack 3 creatures, and you're going to be putting creature cards from graveyards onto your battlefield for free. That is so much stuff, especially since you can copy it with Saheeli's triggers.
Yeah, I mean, that's just demoralizing. Not only are you sacrificing 3 creatures, you're sacrificing 3 creatures every turn when it just keeps being copied by Saheeli, and then one of them is going to be punching you. It's just a little bit too much, I have lines that I won't cross. I'm going to scoop to that.
I want to be playing this against a mill deck where it's like, oh, you milled your best thing? What if I had your best thing instead?
So playing against me.
Oh, absolutely. Every deck for you is a graveyard deck.
Yeah, and I think with Saheeli, since she just kind of copies something, you can just go for the best ETB triggers. They don't have to be artifacts. They don't have to be artificers. They can just be Atali, Primal Conqueror, get a spell from everybody. It's a 4-for-1. It's ridiculous. You can't lose if you keep doing this, and Saheeli can keep doing this. There's also things like already in the deck. Panharmonicon's in here. Conjurer's Closet's in here. This is going to be probably one of the single most powerful cards you can add to this deck.
Is Atali a good card? I don't know.
It's hard to say. For now, I'm going to say yes, and we need some more time to play with it before I give a gold star to it.
Aetherdrift Treachery is also going to be great in here because we love making copies of things with cool ETBs or leaves the battlefield triggers too. And what's better and cooler than stealing your opponent's stuff?
It's just like with Atali. You play Atali, you copy it, then you play Agent of Treachery, and you copy it, and then you're drawing some cards because at that point you have so much stuff that's not yours that your opponents might just be walking away from the table. And now we get to the cuts for this precon, and as we were testing, we saw these cards and we kind of just went, huh? Or they always underperformed for us, and we didn't really see, how the ceiling could be reached too often with the deck. The first one, I had this in every opening hand, and it seemed terrible every time. One with the machine. It's way too much setup for not enough draw. I had to play this to draw 2 cards against you the one game, and it just was not a good time.
Yeah, for seeing this in your opening hand, or since you said it was in your opening hand, I only saw this once out of the 4 or 5 games we played against each other, which should really talk about how little it does. There's also Compostable Gear Hulk. This is just not the best Gear Hulk by far, and not even the best Gear Hulk in these colors alone.
Yeah, it's just a little underwhelming. It's not the biggest effect. Your opponent gets the choice, and I don't feel like I'm getting away with anything copying it, especially when we were just going over some of the cards you can buy for $5 or $1 and make it really, really tough for your opponents. There's also Disallow in this deck. I can't be mad that the card was reprinted because Disallow is, for some reason, like $5. That's fine. I think the card's terrible, and you should probably just cut it from your deck to power up your deck and then be happy that you have a $4 card.
I mean, we just don't love those expensive counter spells. It's just too much mana to keep up. There's also Explosive Vegetation here. I feel like this is just a staple type of precon card where it's serviceable, but you can get better ramp like Skyshroud Claim.
Yeah, you can just upgrade it with one of any number of cards you have laying around, and it'll just be slightly better for you. There's also Stridehanger Automaton that we mentioned. It kind of seems more like a Thopter thing or a more dedicated artifact token thing. That's fine. It's a good card, but just not at home perfectly in this deck. So you can make that swap and be just fine with it. And we have some additional notes. There are other things I want to talk about with this deck. First of all, the spread of ramp removal card draw. We got 13 ramp, 12 removal, and somewhere between 8 to 10 card draw. I don't know if you count Combustible Gear Hulk. Whatever. We're in that range. I think those are all pretty solid numbers for precons. I can't complain too much. The ramp does feel warranted because oh man, this deck has a lot of 4-drops. We will show you the curve spread of this deck that you can see superimposed over us through the magic of editing. And there is a lot of 4s, a lot of clunky stuff. I felt like when I was drawing opening hands, I was desperately hoping for a Signet or some kind of 2-mana Mana Dork.
Every single game that BZ won against me while I was playing the other precon, you had so many lands out and then also so many like Signets or just things that helped you get mana. Your deck was very expensive, even though some of the cards that you beat me with were some of the lower mana, like 3 and 4 mana cards too.
Yeah, I think once you get to this aggressive start where you play something energy, Saheeli, and then you start copying and sending in 5/5s, like your deck is, I think, often going to be the deck that is the problem first if you get yourself under you. But on the other hand, if you keep a weird hand or you don't know how this deck plays and you just sort of shuffle it up, I think you could definitely go 3 lands and a 3-drop, okay, and then you just don't play a spell until turn 4 or turn 3 and you fall way behind because the deck is a little clunky. So one thing I do want to mention with this deck is there is an infinite combo possible. A couple different ones, actually, depending on what critical mass of stuff you get. So the main ingredients to this infinite combo are Decoction Module, which says when your creatures enter, you get an energy, and Whirler Virtuoso, which says pay 3 energy, make a Thopter. If you can finagle your way to having 3 Decoction Modules and a Whirler Virtuoso, that means you can pay 3 energy to make a Thopter, which when it enters, because of your 3 Decoction Modules, will give you 3 energy, meaning you get infinite Thopters. And there's actually also a payoff for this in the deck. Reckless Fireweaver pings your opponents when artifacts enter. So even if infinite dudes that fly doesn't win you the game, you can just win on the spot with damage. That's really, really cool, and you can get there a couple different ways. You need 3 Decoction Modules. We know Saheeli, our commander, can make 1, so that's 2 already. And we also have the Panharmonicon is in here, which doubles the trigger from each Decoction Module, and the other Saheeli, which can turn a servo or something into a Decoction Module. I think that's super cool. Be on the lookout for that, because that's going to end games. That's going to come up.
I mean, it's 2025. I'm not that surprised anymore that there are infinite combos in precons, even though they are very convoluted. It's like if you have piece A and piece B and the moon is right and it's like, 10:30, then we're going to have an infinite combo. But that is very cool. If the stars align, I hope you get it. There's also a note here that says Lightning Runner. Did you spec on this card again?
Okay, I spec'd on Lightning Runner in the past, and it didn't work out for me. I was going to point out that you could also go infinite with Lightning Runner if you make enough copies of it such that when you attack with 4 Lightning Runners, you get 8 energy, and that's enough to take an extra combat, and then Saheeli will trigger again. There are potential board states where you have 4 Lightning Runners and you can take infinite combats and kill people. You have to be mindful of like blockers and stuff, but you could definitely stack up triggers and get things out of it. So be mindful of that because it's less possible, but it is there. This deck having multiple ways to just win the game out of nowhere if it has enough crap in play is definitely something to be mindful of. And how cool is it to surprise your opponents with an infinite combo from a precon? That's like the best feeling.
No, that is super cool. I'm just happy we don't have too many copies lying around here. But if you want to build this commander or any other commanders, you should go online to moxfield.com, the best place online to build a deck.
Didn't see that coming because we're going to reference the best website ever. Amber goes to it whenever she builds a 12-land stacks deck, and I think it's a great way to showcase everything, to show to other people when you click the link of a Moxfield profile. Even if you haven't used the site before, you go, oh, yeah, there's the deck I wanted, not buried under ads or some other weird stuff. Like, it's all perfectly placed.
I am brewing up so many new Aetherdrift commanders, and you should go check it out and follow us, because that's where you can find all of our decks too. But we are moving on to the second precon of the bunch. This is Eternal Might at $55. This is Esper Zombies. The commander is Temet, Noctimoon's Will. He's 2 white, blue, black for a 4/4 with Vigilance and Menace. When you attack, you draw a card, then discard a card. Whenever you draw a card, zombies you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This definitely helps buff your zombies, but because it is 5 mana, it takes a while for him to come out, and if he gets killed, though, he is going to have a tough time coming back out. There is not a ton of ramp in this deck. A lot of things cost very high CMCs, and because of that 7 mana casting cost, if you have to cast him again, that's really rough, and every single time I played him once, I never ended up playing him a second time.
Yeah, it is cool, though, that he does trigger right away. He gives you that draw, discard. This card, to me, screams, once you upgrade me, it's like play Temet GG, where you give your creatures +4/+4 or something off of just drawing a bunch of cards off of very cheap spells that you could play. Brainstorm comes to mind. It's not in the precon, but it is a really, really sweet synergy, drawing a lot of cards for not a lot of mana. Other zombies that draw cards by activating, that pump your other zombies. It's definitely a cohesive strategy. I don't think this deck absolutely nailed it. I think it is going a couple different directions, but the Temet is a really cool card for sure. But let's look at the best reprints, which, by the way, you can find all of these reprints, all of these precons on cardkingdom.com. That's the best place to buy Magic cards. We have Gravecrawler at $7.50. Rock Solid Zombie, although this is one of the worst Gravecrawler precons I've seen in a while. There's not a lot of sacrifice, mill, cast it again. It's more just like, here's a Gravecrawler.
Yeah, here's a zombie. You like zombies in your zombie deck, right? Like, I guess I do. There's also God Eternal Oketra at $9. This is going to flood the field, and there are certain effects that say, when a zombie ETBs, or you can use zombies to do XYZ, and this will really help you get that critical mass of zombies. However, it's another 5 mana zombie, and there's just too many of these in this deck.
Yeah, Unholy Grotto, really good reprint. Didn't know this was $9.50, but it's pretty much free to play because it's a land, and you're just going to get your best zombie back all the time. It's funny because they did Academy Ruins for the energy, and they did Unholy Grotto for the zombies decks. And also Scarab God is here. He's not in the main set, but he's lurking in the precon. $15, pretty solid price.
Yeah, especially if you can get some zombies into your graveyard, because there are draw and discard synergies with your commander and a few other ways to draw and discard cards in the deck. There's also Rot Hulk at $17. This man is getting reprinted left and right. I never thought that I would be seeing him reprinted like 2 times in the same 6-month span, but here we are.
Yeah, because he came out in like game night, and you're like, oh, I'm never going to see this card again. And then it was like, boom, reprint, boom, reprint, boom, reprint. Cool. Now he's going to not be $60, and everyone's going to be happy because this is a really strong card that like can dominate games.
But just like the Teamer Energy precon, there are so many cool new cards in this precon too. The first one we want to talk about is Priest of the Crossing. 3 and a white for a 3/3 flyer. At the beginning of each end step, put X/1/1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of creatures that died under your control this turn. I feel like this deck had sort of an identity crisis, whether that wanted to be zombie tokens or zombies that cared about when things died, or cards drawing and discarding. But I feel like this is one of those cards where you will take it, put it into a deck that really cares about sacrifice, like Aristocrats, and it will be a house in there.
Right, or a different version of this deck where you have a bunch of free stack outlets and you can make those, you can turn those dials and move everything around with power and toughness and trade 2 zombies for 2 counters. This deck can't really do that, but I think this is a good card. Also, Prophet of the Scarabs, definitely great in this deck. This is like probably the best card in the whole deck, full stop, because it's 4 and a blue, 3/4 vigilance. When it enters, you draw cards equal to the number of zombies you control or the number of zombies in your graveyard, whichever is greater. It just works out in the best way for you. This is not only a way to catch up, draw a bunch of cards, build your board out in the early game, but when you have Temet and this, it's basically Craterhoof Behemoth, because your creatures are getting +X where X is the number of creatures you control, because they're all zombies and you're drawing that many.
This is so good. I love the fact that it doesn't say non-token, and it is very easy to get 3+, whether you just had to survive a board wipe or you're just replaying a bunch of stuff and have a couple creature tokens lying around.
Yeah, and if you flicker it or copy it or reanimate it, it doesn't say anything about not working, so it does work. What a weird way to say what I just said, but you understood what I meant. We also have Lost Monarch of Ifnir, 3 and a black, 4/4, Afflict 3, Other zombies you control have afflict 3, so blocking them is kind of a nightmare. At the beginning of your second main phase, if an opponent was dealt damage by a zombie this turn, you mill 3 and get a creature back.
I thought this card was so cool. This is like kind of a pseudo win con in ways if you can make enough zombie tokens. I was playing against Beezy, and there were points where he had to Chaos Warp this away because there was just, I had the Scarab God out and I could make a copy, so if he blocked that would be death, and if he kept it out and he blocked anything or just took the damage, it would be death.
Yeah, it's like I can't chump block because I'm taking 3 damage per chump block, and it just didn't work that way. So it was a pretty sweet finisher style card that almost has like your zombies are unblockable kind of vibe. But if you want to upgrade this deck, I think there's a couple different ways you could go. Definitely figure out if you're going to be like aristocrat, self-mill, fill your graveyard, cast Gravecrawler kind of deck, and then make those considerations. But I think if you want the typical zombies strategy, Carrion Feeder, we gotta have it. It's a free sack outlet. It's a 1-mana zombie. It's perfect.
A Cursed Marauder is also going to help you get creatures off your opponent's field, especially the non-token ones. I feel like when it says each opponent sacks a creature or everyone sacks a creature, everyone always manages to sack a token, but not anymore.
Plus, it's a mana cheaper for a better effect. So, I mean, the card's super power crept. It's great. Noxious Ghoul is a zombie staple. It is almost like a permanent board wipe forever until it leaves play because they are not going to be able to play any creatures. It's like a Tox roll kind of effect where it's just like, you better deal with this before you go about playing those blockers.
You're going to have so many zombies that are so powerful with your commander's effect. There's also Ravenous Rotbelly because you're going to be able to sack a ton of your disposable zombies, your 2/2s and such, and then you are going to make everyone sack real creatures that they paid real mana for.
Finally, we have Cephalid Coliseum, a really sweet land that I hope every one of these decks plays because it taps for blue, deals 1 damage to you, or Threshold, you can sacrifice it and pay 1 and tap it to draw 3 and then discard 3, which is an instant speed. Your creatures get +3/+3 with Temet.
And also, if you use the alternate commander too, this could be a great way to be putting tokens of those out at instant speed.
If you're looking to crank up the spice level for some non-budget ads, I would recommend Necro Duality. This copies all of your zombies when they enter, and it has infinite combos with things like Rot Hulk. If you wanted to add Carrion Feeder to this deck, then you have Necro Duality with Rot Hulk. That goes infinite, and you reanimate all your zombies forever.
Kindred Discovery is also going to be sick in this deck. I feel like one of the things that this deck was lacking most was card draw, which is very ironic considering the commander and what he wants you to do. But with Kindred Discovery, you're going to be making so many zombies, and you're going to be getting so many cards off of them too.
It's another like geometric scaling Craterhoof type thing where it's like attack with 6 zombies, they get +6/+6. I draw 6 cards. Even if you wipe me next turn, you are devastated now, and I refilled my entire hand. This card, I think, maybe is one of the biggest misses that maybe should have been in this precon. It's also Warren Soul Trader, another great free sack outlet with Gravecrawler and that kind of thing. You could go the combo route and just do the like Blood Artist, Gravecrawler, and Warren Soul Trader and just do infinite stuff that way.
I feel like there are so many accidental combos baked into zombie decks already.
Yeah.
If you're going to go for that super spicy or accidental spicy route, just throw it in, or you could just be getting some mana off it and play it in a little more fair way. There's also Yawgmoth Thran Physician. That's a little bit of card draw, a little bit of removal, an awesome guy overall, and he was only 4 mana.
He's a great guy. You know,
He's a great guy, maybe not lore-wise.
He's someone I want to go get a beer with. He is perfect because when you attack with your whole board, you will undoubtedly have creatures be blocked by bigger things, and they're gonna die. And you go, actually, before damage, sacrifice everything that would have died, get all my cards back, and pump the rest of the stuff. So they're gonna have to play around not only the things you attack with, but the potential for how much stuff you could sacrifice, and they might be dead if they don't create a bunch of bad blocks for themselves. And Yawgmoth does that all without even having to activate.
We don't have to tell them how good Yawgmoth is, though.
True.
They already know. And Stinging Study is going to be awesome in this deck because your commander costs 5, so you're getting 5 cards off of it and be giving all of your zombies +5 when they attack. That is a lot of damage that's going to get through, especially for those 2/2 zombie tokens.
Right, like when you talk about adding card draw to this deck, I mean, yeah, you could add Rhystic Study and Mystic Remore, but they're not going to do anything to trigger Temet. If you really want those dual mode cards that are like, oh, when I'm developing, it's card draw, and when I'm winning, it's overrun. Then you're going to get the sorcery speed, or at least cards you can cast during your turn, maybe even before damage with like Stinging Study, and just destroy people.
But we have to move on to the cuts. One of the cuts in here is Never Return. I feel like this is a flavor one because there's like Dusk and Dawn and stuff too.
Yeah.
But this is just a slow card overall, and I don't think it's great in this deck.
I hope it never returns. We also have Timeless Dragon. It's just another flavor inclusion because it has Eternalized, but we could care less about the actual dragon side, so you just plain cycle it, and this feels like 2 mana planes most of the time. Commence the Endgame is like a draw 2. It does pump your zombies, But I just think it's really slow. Like I'd rather have more card draw or more zombie.
Liliana's Death Majesty is, I feel like I see this Planeswalker everywhere, whether that be Jumpstart or Precons, and I don't want to see it because it's not that good of a card.
Yeah, the ultimate is really good, but I just don't know how you're going to get there. Finally, the most confusing inclusion in this Precon, and I think it's a card you can just cut right away. Maskwood Nexus is in here, and normally I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah, maybe there's some other synergies with it. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find any card that was like pump, like the other deck had pump Thopters, where I could at least say, I guess I'm going to cut it, but I guess that's what that's there for. Every card is a zombie. There are 7 non-zombies in this deck, but most of them have Eternalize, are shapeshifters that just enter as something else anyway, or are like Grave Titan that isn't a zombie, but it makes zombies. So like I have no clue why Maskwood Nexus is here. It's a cool reprint. We need that, but like please cut it.
I feel like every time I drew it, it was a big brick in my hand, and all of my zombies are pretty expensive to begin with. They're either 2 mana or 5+ mana. So spending like that 3 mana and tapping it for the 2/2 zombie was never what I wanted to be doing, because I was still struggling to even play 2 spells a turn.
Yeah, and this deck ended up with 9 ramp, 11 removal, but only 7 card draw. And I just feel like every time you played it, you were just low on cards, or you had this big board and you were like, I wish I could pump them with anything. This is, I feel like, one of those decks you can cram 15 card draw spells into, and you're not going to be too worried about it, because even when you're winning, the card draw has tangible effects on the board.
It was just so ironic that this is the deck that wanted card draw the most because it had tangible benefit of combat damage, and yet I struggled to find things. Also, some of the card draw was lacking. There's Pull from Tomorrow, but all of my spells were like 5 mana. Casting Your Commander's 5 mana, a bunch of zombies are 5, 6, and 7. So I couldn't be playing that and holding it up because I need to advance my board. So I feel like if you didn't have a billion mana in here, the card draw in this deck was not really working.
Yeah, the energy Precon is definitely off to the races. Like, it's really fast. It's annoying from like turn 5 onward. This deck has more of the inevitability as it generates a bunch of creatures, and then when it tries to win, it's attacking you for like 150, like you're dead. But it takes a little bit longer to get there, and this particular Precon I think struggles because it's a real crapshoot on if you find card draw, then you're good. But if you don't, you have 2 cards in your hand, 6 zombies in play, and your commander doesn't do anything. I think this deck does have good evasion, though. There are some solid ways to like give all your zombies flying. I was surprised by some of these new cards. I was like, wait, let me do all these bonuses. You attacked, so they all get +1/+1. They'll have +1/+0 from this enchantment. Now they'll have +1/+1 flying. Like, oh, I'm screwed.
I feel like this is a good base deck for parts. If you want to take out 40 cards and make a cool zombie deck, that's cool, or a cycling deck, it has that too. But as a cohesive deck, it's not the best, but playing the Teamer Energy one out of the box was definitely more of a cohesive play experience.
Right, but then with that deck, it's sort of the flip-flop. You can't put the new Precon cards anywhere else except for an energy deck, for the most part. The Thopter card, yeah, that's a cool one. But yeah, it's like energy is so parasitic that you're playing energy or you don't care about all these cards ever. But it's a much better out-of-the-box deck. This is like, oh, there's a lot of cool parts in here, but you might want to switch out 15 cards to make the deck do one thing very, very well instead of 2 or 3 things okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with this evaluation, but if you want to hear more about cards we like, here's a video about cards we like for the month of January.